Dear students, in the present session, we discuss the characteristics approach to consumer theory introduced by Kelvin Lancaster. Characteristics approach to demand theory introduced by Kelvin Lancaster. This approach postulates that consumers demand a commodity because of the characteristics, the properties, the attributes of the commodity. Consumers demand a commodity because of its characteristics, its attributes, its properties. And Lancaster uses the term consumption technology. Consumption technology. According to Lancaster, each good represents technology for producing characteristics desired by the consumer. Each good represents technology for producing characteristics desired by the consumer. And it is these characteristics which give rise to utility. So, a consumer demands a commodity because of its characteristics. And a commodity is nothing but something which represents a technology to produce these characteristics, and it is these characteristics which give rise to utility. For example, a consumer does not demand beef as such, but because of the characteristics of protein and calorie contained in beef. The characteristics of protein and calorie contained in beef, and it is these characteristics, that is protein and calorie, the source of utility. Also, this protein and calorie is also contained in chicken and also pork, but in different proportions. So, the characteristics are contained in many commodities, but in different proportions. So, a good possesses more than one characteristic. Similarly, any given characteristic is present in more than one good. A good possesses more than one characteristic, and a given characteristic is present in more than one good. Now, to explain the equilibrium of the consumer, we use the traditional tools of indifference curves and the budget line. Indifference curves and the budget line. Let us see how a consumer attains equilibrium spending a certain amount on commodities, beef, pork, chicken, etc., giving rise to the characteristics protein and calorie. Suppose that Suppose that a consumer has $10, and suppose that $10 of, we take a calorie on the y-axis, protein on the x-axis, and this ray is the characteristic ray for pork, and this ray represents the characteristic ray for beef. I will explain what is meant by characteristic ray, etc. For the time being, suppose that our consumer has $10, and if he spends the entire $10 on pork, he will be able to obtain a point such as here. That is, from pork he will get this much calorie and this much protein. And if he spends the entire $10 on beef, he will get a point such as B, representing this much protein and this much calorie. This ray is the characteristic ray for pork. This is the characteristic ray for beef. And as you can see, as the characteristic rays are different, the proportion in which calorie and protein is contained in pork and beef is different. Calorie and protein is contained in both beef and pork, but the proportions are different. As I stated earlier, one commodity possesses more than one characteristic. Also, same characteristic will be present in different commodities, but at different proportions. Now, the budget line is AB. The budget line is AB. AB is the budget line. And OAB is known as the feasible region. Feasible region means, given the consumer has $10, and this represents pork, this represents beef. The consumer's feasible set is OAB, and the budget line AB is also known as efficiency frontier. The budget line itself is known as efficiency frontier. Now, our consumer can purchase any combination within OAB because it is the feasible region. And to maximize utility, he must purchase a combination on the efficiency frontier, the budget line AB. Now let us assume that our consumer has the indifference curve given as U1. U1 is the indifference curve. And this U1, the indifference curve, is drawn in the characteristic space. Because this space represents the characteristics of calorie and protein. You know that in the indifference curve analysis, we have a commodity Y here, commodity X here. So the space is, in this space we have indifference curves representing different levels of utility. So if it is a space in the context of indifference curves, it is a utility space, not a commodity space, because points on an indifference curve represents a given level of utility from commodities X and Y. That is, the commodity space is transferred into utility space. That is a point which we will discuss later. So this is the characteristics space, and U1 is the indifference curve in the utility in the characteristic space, and we assume that our consumer maximizes utility at point C, where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line, the efficiency frontier AB. Now we assume that our consumer allocate his income in such a way that he will purchase pork, and we assume that our consumer purchases or allocates his $10 on pork and beef in such a way that he will get OG amount of calorie and protein from pork and OEF amount of calorie and protein from beef, and he reaches point C. C represents this much of protein and this much of calorie. So now the question is how we reach here. Now consider this. In the last session, we have seen that if OG is a vector, OF is another vector, and if OG and OF are two sides of a parallelogram, then what is the diagonal? The diagonal is the sum of these vectors. So our consumer obtain OG amount of calorie and protein from pork, OF amount of calorie and protein from beef, and he reaches point C, where he maximizes utility. And remember the topic which we have discussed in the last class. Now suppose that we introduce a third commodity in the characteristic space, namely chicken. That is, protein and calories are present in chicken also, but in different proportions. And now suppose that if the entire dollar is spent on chicken, he will reach point H. That is this much of protein and this much of calorie. Now the efficiency frontier becomes this. Now the efficiency frontier is AH. The efficiency frontier is now AH. And he maximizes utility at, say, point, this is U1, this is point C. He maximizes utility on U2, point J. He maximizes utility at point J by purchasing pork and chicken. He will not purchase beef now because beef is lying on a lower efficiency frontier. Now as you can see, if OH amount of protein and calorie are obtainable from chicken, the new efficiency frontier is AH, and the consumer maximizes his utility at point J. And how he reaches J is he allocates his $10 on pork and chicken, and you can think of the same reasoning. Say he will get OG from pork, and suppose that there is a point here. Again, OG from pork and OM from chicken. Again, these are two vectors, two sides of the parallelogram. Again, he reaches point J. In this case, beef will not be purchased. Now, initially he used to purchase pork and beef. Now he purchased pork and chicken. Initially the equilibrium was at point C. Now the equilibrium is at point G. Now the reduction in price can be shown by an outward movement along the characteristic line. Suppose that if the price of pork is halved, then from point A he will reach somewhere here. The same is true for beef, chicken, etc. And if there is an increase in income, then it is shown by an outward movement of the budget line. If the income becomes $20 as an example, then the budget line will shift. Initially, it will shift from AB to somewhere here. In the new case, from AH to something like this. So, reduction in price is shown as outward movement along the characteristics ray. Increase in income is shown as outward shift of the budget line. Now, this is the essence of the characteristics approach. Let us see what are the advantages of characteristics approach. One, substitution among commodities can be easily explained in terms of characteristics approach. As you have learned in the indifference curve analysis, indifference curve analysis is concerned with substitutes. It also discusses about complements, etc., but as special cases. Now the question is, why a consumer substitutes one commodity for another commodity? The reason is they possess same characteristics. So substitution between commodities can be easily explained in terms of characteristics approach. As an example, coffee and tea are substitutes because both contain the same characteristics, namely they are stimulants. The second advantage is you can always introduce a new good by introducing a new characteristic rate. As in this case, a new good chicken has been introduced by introducing a new characteristic rate. But our consumer will purchase the new goods if and only if its price is sufficiently low. Suppose that with $10, our consumer can purchase only okay amount of chicken. Can purchase only, can reach only point K, where he will get only okay amount of protein and, this much protein and this much calorie. In that case, the budget line, in that case, our consumer will not purchase chicken. Our consumer will not purchase chicken. He will purchase only pork and beef because he will be on a lower budget line. Like this. Pork and chicken, this budget line, and pork and beef, this budget line, and this budget line is above this budget line. So our consumer will not purchase chicken because its price is very high. And quality changes can easily be explained in terms of characteristics approach. By rotating the characteristics ray. By rotating the characteristics ray, we can show if there is a change in the combination of calories and protein. So quality changes can be easily explained in terms of characteristics approach. The fourth advantage is when we compare prices of two goods identical except for characteristics, we can use this analysis. And this is an example of what is known as implicit or hedonic price. Implicit or hedonic price. The point is you consider two houses. Both are identical in terms of square feet, but they are different in terms of characteristics. Different in terms of characteristics. One house is situated near what is known as situated in an area with a low pollution, access to good schools and hospitals, park, etc., compared to the other one. Then that house will fetch a very high price in the market due to the characteristics. This is known as implicit or hedonic price. Even if the two houses are identical with respect to their space, square feet, etc., the prices are different due to what is known as hidden characteristics. So such models can be explained using the characteristics approach. And these are the advantages of characteristics approach. As far as the disadvantages are concerned, characteristics like taste, style, etc., are subjective and cannot be measured, especially the characteristics of services. How will you assess, for example, the characteristics of two teachers teaching you the same subject? Anyway, this is the characteristics approach, and remember the terms. Budget line, also known as efficiency frontier, then the feasible region, etc. Initially, the efficiency frontier, new efficiency frontier. If price of chicken is this, the efficiency frontier now becomes AB because this is not applicable. So he will purchase pork and chicken, pork and beef in the third case, like that. Let us consider one more example to clarify a few points. Suppose that we have three commodities. We have three commodities. The commodities are orange, apple, and mangoes. And the characteristics are vitamin A and vitamin C. Now let us see the content of this vitamin in these commodities A and C. In the oranges, 2 and 10. In the apples, it is 10 and 2. And in mangoes, it is 8 and 8. We assume that each good costs $1 and also that the consumer has $10 to spend. From one orange, you will get 2 units of vitamin A, 10 units of vitamin C. From apples, 10 and 2, mangoes, 8 and 8. Remember this, characteristics are present in all these goods. and the same good possess more than one characteristics, our consumer has $10 to spend. If our consumer spends the entire $10 on oranges, he will get 20 units of vitamin A and 100 units of vitamin C, 100 units and 20 units here, then 80 and 80 here. One orange will give 20 units, sorry, 2 units. If and C 10 units, so if the entire 10 is spent, he will get 20 vitamin A, 10 vitamin C, then 120 from apples, mangoes 80 and 80. Now let us mark these points. Vitamin C and vitamin A and 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Now, from oranges, he will get 20 units of vitamin A and 100 units from vitamin C. This is point, let it be point A from oranges. In the characteristics red, and 20 and 100 from apples. Let it be point B. And 80 and 80 from 80 and 80 from mangoes. Let it be point C. So the budget line or the efficiency frontier is like this. Efficiency frontier is like this. And suppose that the indifference curve is I1 or IC1. Our consumer maximizes utility at point E1 by purchasing both apples and mangoes. He will not purchase oranges here. And remember this, it is assumed that the position of the indifference curve is here. If the position is somewhere here, he will purchase oranges and mangoes. So, oranges and mangoes, then mangoes and apples, then another efficiency fund, another one is if for the combination oranges and apples represents a lower level of utility. A lower level of utility. Now, suppose that the price increases so that the price of mangoes doubles. The price of mangoes doubles so that he can now purchase only 40, he will get only 40 as he can purchase only. So this is the point 40 and 40. So if the efficiency frontier is now oranges and mangoes and apples. Oranges and mangoes and apples. Now, the equilibrium is defined on IC2 at E2. IC2 at E2. Now, as you can see, the new equilibrium is here. Now, the budget lines A, C, let me give a value here. AC and BC are not relevant. What is relevant is only A, B, but that was not relevant earlier. Initially, the budget line orange and mangoes, AC, mangoes and apples, CB, and oranges and apples, AB. So initially it was not relevant. Now AC, BC and AB. Now this AC is not relevant, CB is also not relevant. What is relevant is AB. As the price of mangoes doubles. This is a characteristic ray. This is another characteristic ray, and this is the third characteristic ray. This characteristic ray represents oranges, this one mangoes, and this one apples. Now you compare this graph with the graph drawn earlier and define the budget lines, the efficiency found here. And this is what is known as characteristics approach to consumer theory, introduced by Kelvin Lancaster.